The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland like a living thing trying to tear everything apart. Hannah pulled her small pet closer to her chest, feeling the tiny creature shake against her torn uniform. The little Nuki was barely breathing now. Its soft fur covered in ice crystals that formed every time it exhaled. Everything had gone wrong so fast just 3 hours ago. She had been sitting in her research ship checking readings from the planet's dead atmosphere. The mission was supposed to be simple: land on the surface, take some soil samples, check for any signs of ancient life, then return home to the warm, safe laboratories of her homeworld. But the storm had appeared from nowhere, rolling across the horizon like a wall of death. Her ship, the Morning Star, had been built for research, not survival. The hull was designed to be lightweight, so it could carry more scientific equipment instead of heavy armor. When the waves hit them, the ship had been thrown around like a toy. The engines failed first, then the navigation systems, then the emergency power. Everything went dark and cold as they fell toward the surface. The crash had been terrible. Metal screamed and tore as the ship hit the ground again and again, rolling across the ice. The impact threw Hannah around the cabin like she weighed nothing. She remembered hitting her head on something hard and then waking up to find her ship in pieces, scattered across the frozen ground. Now she sat in what used to be the cargo hold, but was now just a twisted piece of metal that barely kept the worst of the wind away. The walls had holes in them that let the freezing air pour through. Her breath came out in white clouds that turned to ice before they could float away the Nuki in. Her arms made a soft sound that was almost too quiet to hear. Its eyes were closing more often now, and staying closed longer each time. Hannah knew what that meant. The cold was winning. The little creature was dying, and soon she would follow. She had tried everything. The emergency beacon was crushed under a piece of the engine. The communication system was dead. The heating unit had been destroyed in the crash. Her survival suit was torn in 3 places, letting the cold seep through to freeze. Her skin, her emergency food, was scattered somewhere in the wreckage, and even if she could find it, her hands were too numb to open the containers. The nearest rescue station was on the other side of the planet, 3 days' travel through this frozen hell. Even if she could walk that far, which she could not, the cold would kill her long before she made it halfway. Her people, the Kaleri, were not built for this kind of weather. They came from a world of warm oceans and gentle breezes, where the temperature never changed more than a few degrees. Hannah looked down at her pet again. The Nuki had been a gift from her sister before this mission. It was supposed to keep her company during the long months of research work. The little creature was smart and friendly, always ready to play or cuddle when she felt lonely. Now it was going to die because of her choices. She remembered the day she had decided to become a planetary researcher. Her parents had wanted her to stay home and work in the safe, climate-controlled cities like most Kaleri, but something inside her had always wanted to see new places, to discover things that no one else had found. The danger had seemed exciting back then when she was young and foolish. The wind got stronger, shaking the broken walls of her shelter. Ice and snow blew through the holes, covering everything in white. The temperature was dropping fast as the planet's sun disappeared behind the storm clouds. Soon it would be dark and the cold would get even worse. Hannah tried to remember what she knew about hypothermia from her survival training. The first stage was shivering, which had already started hours ago. The second stage was when the shivering stopped and you started to feel warm even though you were freezing. That was when people made bad decisions and took off their clothes thinking they were too hot. The third stage was unconsciousness and then death. She was not shivering anymore. The Nuki opened its eyes one more time and looked up at her. Its tiny mouth moved like it was trying to say something, but no sound came out. Hannah felt tears on her cheeks that froze as soon as they appeared. She had saved this little creature from a cruel traitor who kept it in a tiny cage. Now she could not even save it from the cold above them. Something changed in the storm. The howling wind was still there, but underneath it she heard a new sound. It was like thunder, but different, more focused. It seemed to be getting louder, which made no sense because thunder was supposed to fade away. Hannah looked up through a hole in the roof expecting to see more storm clouds. What she saw instead made her think the cold was making her see things. The sky was glowing in places with lights that moved in patterns that storms did not make. Something was up there, something that was not natural. The sound got louder and louder until it hurt her ears. The lights got brighter, too bright to look at directly. She could feel heat on her face, real heat, not the fake warmth that came before freezing to death. Whatever was up there was hot enough to warm the air, even through the storm. The Nuki stirred in her arms, lifting its head to look at the lights. Its eyes were more alert than they had been in hours, like it could sense that something important was happening. The lights were getting closer now, falling toward the ground with purpose. This was not random space debris or chunks of ice. This was something that could fly, something that could control where it went. Hana tried to sit up straighter, tried to wave or signal somehow, but her body would not obey her. The cold had taken too much strength from her muscles. She could see the shape now as it broke through the lowest clouds. It had wings, or things that looked like wings, and a body that reflected the strange lights, metal and glass and other materials she could not identify. It was definitely a ship, but not like any ship she had ever seen. The design was wrong for Kaleri technology or any of the other species she knew about. The ship was heading straight for them. Hana held her pet tighter and watched as their salvation or their destruction fell from the alien sky. The sound was deafening now, shaking the ground and making what was left of her ship rattle like it might fall apart completely. Heat washed over them in waves as the unknown vessel prepared to land in the last moments before it touched down. Hana saw details that made no sense. The ship looked like it had been built for war, but also for exploration. It was scarred and dented like it had seen many battles, but it flew with the grace of something designed for long journeys through space. Then it hit the ground with a crash that made her ears ring and sent up clouds of steam where the hot metal met the frozen surface. Through the steam and smoke, a door opened with a sound like tearing metal. Someone was coming out, someone who might save them or might make everything worse. Hana closed her eyes and held her dying pet and waited to see which it would be. The being that stepped out of the smoking ship was like nothing Hana had ever seen in all her years of studying different alien species. It walked on two legs like her own people, but everything else about it was completely wrong and somehow completely right at the same time. The creature was tall, much taller than any Kaleri, and built with thick muscles that showed even through its strange clothing. Its skin was pale like the ice around them, but it did not seem bothered by the freezing temperature at all. While Hana was dying from the cold, this being acted like it was taking a pleasant walk in a park. Shocked her most was the hair. The creature had long, dark hair growing from the top of its head, not scales or feathers or the smooth skin that most intelligent species had. The hair moved in the wind like it was alive, and the being seemed to use it to keep warm, somehow tucking it around its neck like a scarf. The being's face was flat with two eyes that pointed forward instead of two. The sides like prey animals, both eyes focused on her immediately with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow was not. The eyes were dark brown and they seemed to see everything at once, taking in her condition, the wreckage of her ship and the dying Nuki in her arms. When it started walking toward her, Hana noticed that its feet did not slip on the ice at all. Each step was placed with perfect balance, like the creature had grown up walking on frozen surfaces. The clothing it wore looked thin, too thin for this deadly cold, but steam was actually rising from its body, as if it was generating its own heat. The being knelt down beside her and spoke in a voice that came through her universal translator as warm and concerned. The words were in a language she had never heard before, but the translator worked perfectly, turning the alien sounds into meanings she could understand. The first thing it said was asking if she was hurt, but it did not wait for her answer. Instead, it began checking her over with hands that were surprisingly gentle. Its fingers were longer than Kaleri fingers, and they moved with the skill of someone who knew exactly what to look for when examining an injured person. When the being saw the Nuki in her arms, something amazing happened. Its whole expression changed from professional concern to something much softer. The hard lines around its eyes relaxed, and it made a soft clicking sound with its tongue that seemed designed to comfort small, frightened animals. The being reached out one finger toward the Nuki, moving slowly, so as not to startle the tiny creature. When its skin touched the Nuki's fur, Hana felt warmth transfer between them, actual body heat that brought a little life back to her pet's eyes. The Nuki made a small chirping sound that it had not made in hours. Hana tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She managed to tell the being that they were both dying from the cold and that there was nothing anyone could do. The being listened to her words with complete attention. then shook its head with what looked like determination. Without asking permission, the being scooped both Hana and her pet up in its arms as if they weighed nothing at all. The strength in those arms was incredible, but the way it held them was careful and protective, like it was carrying precious cargo that must not be damaged. As they moved toward the strange ship, Hana got a better look at her rescuer. The being wore clothes that seemed designed for many different types of weather. There were layers that could be added or removed, and pockets everywhere, filled with tools and supplies. Its boots had special solace that gripped the ice perfectly, and its outer jacket was made from material that seemed to repel both wind and water. The ship itself was even stranger up close. The hull was covered in scars and dents that told stories of battles and accidents, but every system seemed to work perfectly. The door opened smoothly despite the damage, and warm air poured out like a gift from heaven. The contrast between the freezing wasteland outside and the comfortable environment inside was so extreme that Hana gasped. Inside the ship was like stepping into a different world. The walls were lined with equipment that hummed with quiet power, and everything was arranged with the efficiency of someone who spent a lot of time in small spaces. The air smelled clean and warm, with hints of something like flowers or growing plants. The being carried them to what looked like a medical bay and set Hana down on a soft surface that immediately began warming her body. The Nuki was placed in a small chamber that filled with gentle heat and soft light. Within moments, her pet was breathing easier and its eyes were bright again. The being introduced itself with a name that sounded like Taemin and explained that it belonged to a species called humans. Humans came from a world called Earth, and they were apparently new to this part of the galaxy. The way Taemin talked about his people made them sound like explorers and adventurers who traveled the stars looking for new experiences while he worked on treating their hypothermia. Taemin explained that he had picked up the remains of Hana's distress signal. The beacon had been damaged in the crash, but it was still sending out a weak pulse that most ships would never have noticed. Human technology was apparently sensitive enough to detect even the faintest calls for help. What amazed Hana was how prepared this human was for exactly this situation. He had medical equipment designed for treating cold exposure, warming chambers for small animals, and even special food that would help her body recover from near freezing. His ship carried supplies for dozens of different emergency situations, as if he expected to run into people who needed help. The way Taemin moved around his ship showed that this was not the first time he had rescued someone in distress. Every action was smooth and practiced, like he had done this many times before. When Hana asked about this, he just smiled and said that humans seemed to have a talent for being in the right place when someone needed help. As the warmth returned to her body and she watched her pet playing happily in its heated chamber, Hana began to understand that she had encountered something remarkable. This was not just a lucky accident or a coincidence. This human had risked his own life to save strangers he had never met simply because they needed help. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the human ship everything was safe and warm. Taemin had given them hot drinks and soft blankets and was monitoring their recovery with equipment that seemed far more advanced than anything the Kaleri had developed. Looking at her rescuer, Hana realized that the galaxy had just become a much more interesting place. There were humans out there flying through space in scarred ships, listening for distress calls and ready to risk everything to help people they had never met. She was beginning to understand that she had not just been saved by an alien, she had been saved by a hero. The warmth inside the human ship felt like being reborn. Hana could feel life flowing back into her frozen limbs as Taemin worked around her with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. The machines he used hummed with quiet power, and each one seemed designed for a specific type of emergency. The Nuki was the first to fully recover. The little creature had been placed in a warming chamber that looked like it was built specifically for small animals. The temperature inside rose slowly and steadily, bringing the Nuki's body heat back to normal without shocking its system. Within an hour, the tiny pet was chirping happily and pressing its face against the clear walls of the chamber. Taemin watched the Nuki with obvious pleasure, and when it was safe to remove the little creature from the warming chamber, he did so with gentle hands. The Nuki immediately climbed up his arm and perched on his shoulder, where it began grooming his hair as if claiming ownership of This new friend for Hana. The recovery took longer. The human explained that her species was more sensitive to temperature changes than his, and that rushing the warming process could damage her internal organs, so she lay on the soft medical bed, wrapped in blankets that seemed to generate their own heat while machines monitored every aspect of her condition while she recovered. Taemin told her more about humans, and their homeworld Earth was apparently what galactic scientists called a death world, a planet so dangerous that most species could not survive there. For more than a few days, the weather changed constantly from burning hot to freezing cold, sometimes in the same day. The oceans on Earth were filled with salt water that would kill most aliens if they tried to drink it. The air contained gases that were toxic to many species, and the gravity was strong enough to crush visitors from low-gravity worlds. But somehow humans had not just survived on this deadly planet. They had thrived. Taemin explained that dealing with constant danger had made humans very good at adapting to new situations. When faced with a problem, they did not run away or give up. Instead, they found ways to solve it or work around it. This was why he had been so prepared for her rescue. He carried equipment for dozens of different emergencies, because on Earth you never knew what might try to kill you next. The human also told her about something called pack bonding, which seemed to be a fundamental part of human nature. Humans formed strong emotional connections with other beings very quickly, and once they considered someone part of their pack, they would do almost anything to protect them. This explained why Taemin had risked his life to save complete strangers. As Hana listened to these stories, she began to understand why the human had seemed so calm during the rescue. For someone who came from a world where deadly storms and dangerous animals were normal events, a simple crash on a frozen planet was probably not even worth worrying about. The Nuki had made itself completely at home on Taemin's shoulder and was now trying to build a nest in his hair. The human seemed to find this amusing rather than annoying, and he reached up occasionally to pet the little creature with one finger. The bond between them had formed instantly, as if they had known each other for years. Taemin showed Hana around his ship while she recovered, and she was amazed by what she saw. Every surface was covered with equipment designed for exploration and rescue. The walls were lined with tools for repairing damaged ships, medical supplies for treating dozens of different species, and enough food to last for months of travel. The ship itself was obviously old and had seen many battles. The hull was scarred with marks from energy weapons and meteor impacts, but every system worked perfectly. Taemin explained that humans built their ships to last, and that this particular vessel had belonged to his family for 3 generations. What impressed Hana most was how the human had modified his ship specifically for rescue work. The medical bay was larger than it needed to be for one person and was equipped to treat many different types of aliens. The cargo hold contained emergency supplies, and the communication system was designed to pick up even the weakest distress signals. When she asked why he had chosen to spend his life rescuing strangers, Taemin looked thoughtful. For a moment before answering, he said that humans had a saying that no one should die alone, and that if you had the power to help someone, it was your responsibility to do so. This was not a law or a rule. It was just something that humans believed. Storm outside was finally beginning to weaken, and Taemin was able to send a message to the nearest rescue station. A Kaleri ship would arrive within a few hours to take Hana and her pet home, but she found herself reluctant to leave. This human had opened her eyes to a completely new way of thinking about the universe. She had spent her whole life believing that survival was about avoiding danger and staying safe in controlled environments, but humans seemed to believe that survival was about facing danger head-on and helping others do the same. The difference was remarkable, and it made her wonder what other assumptions about life she had been wrong about. The Nuki had fallen asleep curled up in Taemin's hair, and the human was careful not to move too much so as not to disturb the tiny creature. This simple act of kindness toward such a small and seemingly unimportant animal told Hana more about human nature than all the stories about their dangerous homeworld. As they waited for the rescue ship, Hana found herself studying her savior with new eyes. Taemin was not just an alien who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. He was a representative of an entire species that had built its civilization around the idea that helping others was more important than personal safety. The universe had just become a much more hopeful place, and Hana was eager to learn more about these remarkable beings called humans. As Hannah regained her strength, she found herself fascinated by everything about her rescuer and his species. The more Taemin told her about humans and their homeworld, the more impossible it all seemed. How could any intelligent species evolve on a planet that was actively trying to kill them every single day? Earth, according to the human, sounded like a nightmare world that no sane being would ever want to visit. The weather systems were completely unpredictable, with storms that could flatten entire cities and temperature changes that happened so fast they could kill you if you were not prepared. The planet had something called seasons, where the climate changed dramatically 4 times. Every year the oceans were not just salty, they were filled with creatures that could swallow a human whole or inject deadly poisons. With a single bite, the land had predators that hunted in packs, using intelligence and teamwork to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Some of these predators had apparently learned to hunt humans specifically, but the most shocking thing was that humans had not just learned to survive on this death world, they had conquered it. They had built cities that could withstand the worst storms and developed technology that let them live comfortably in climates that ranged from burning deserts to frozen wastelands. When Hannah expressed her amazement at this, Taemin just laughed and said that humans were very good at adapting. He explained that when faced with a problem that seemed impossible to solve, humans had 2 choices: give up and die, or find a way to make the impossible possible. They had been choosing the second option for so long that it had become their natural response to any challenge. The Nuki had woken up from its nap in Taemin's hair and was now exploring the ship with obvious delight. The little creature seemed to understand that it was safe here, and it showed no fear of the human despite the fact that they had never met before. Animals were usually good judges of character, and the Nuki's immediate trust told Hannah a lot about what kind of person Taemin really was. Taemin showed her pictures of Earth on the ship's computer, and Hannah stared in wonder at landscapes that looked like they belonged in a fantasy story rather than on a real planet. There were mountains that reached so high their peaks were covered in permanent ice forests so thick that the sunlight never reached the ground, and deserts where the sand was hot enough to cook food. The human cities were equally amazing. Millions of people lived together in structures that rose toward the sky like artificial mountains. The buildings were designed to flex and bend during earthquakes rather than break, and the entire city could be sealed against poisonous storms or extreme weather. But what impressed Hannah most was that humans had not been content to just survive on their homeworld. They had actively sought out new challenges, traveling to the most dangerous places on Earth just to see if they could survive there. Some humans chose to live at the bottom of the ocean in special habitats, while others made their homes on top of mountains, where the air was too thin for most life. Taemin explained that this drive to explore and overcome challenges was what had eventually led humans to space. They had turned their attention to the stars not because they were running away from their dangerous homeworld, but because they had mastered it so completely that they were ready for new adventures. The human also told her more about pack bonding and how it affected the way his people interacted with other species. Humans formed emotional attachments very quickly and very deeply. Once they decided that someone was worth protecting, they would go to extraordinary lengths to keep that person safe. This explained why Taemin had been willing to risk his life to save her and her pet. He had not seen them as strangers who were not his responsibility. Instead, his human instincts had immediately classified them as pack members who deserved protection. The fact that they were different species had not mattered at all. Hannah found this concept both wonderful and slightly frightening. If humans bonded so easily with others, what would happen when they encountered hostile species? Would they try to make friends with beings who wanted to destroy them? She asked Taemin about this, and his answer surprised her. The human explained that while humans preferred to make friends rather than enemies, they were also very good at fighting when they had to. Their homeworld had taught them that sometimes the only way to protect the people you cared about was to eliminate the things that threatened them. Humans could be incredibly gentle with those they loved and absolutely ruthless with those who tried to harm their pack. The rescue ship from the Kaleri fleet was getting closer, and soon their time together would end. But Hannah found herself with so many questions about humans and their culture. She wanted to know more about their art, their music, their philosophy, and their dreams for the future. Taemin seemed happy to answer her questions, and she got the impression that he was just as curious about her people as she was about his. This mutual curiosity seemed to be another human trait. They were genuinely interested in learning about other species and understanding how different civilizations had developed, the Nuki had claimed a permanent place on Taemin's shoulder and showed no interest in leaving its new friend. The little creature had never bonded with anyone so quickly before, but there was something about the human that animals seemed to recognize and trust. As they talked, Hannah began to understand that meeting this human was going to change her life forever. She had always thought of herself as brave for choosing to explore dangerous planets, but compared to what humans did every day, her adventures seemed almost safe. The universe was full of wonders and dangers and mysteries waiting to be discovered. But now she knew that it was also full of humans, beings who would risk everything to help a stranger, and who saw impossible challenges as opportunities for growth. She was beginning to realize that her people had been thinking about survival all wrong. The rescue ship was still hours away, and Hannah found herself treasuring every moment of conversation with Taemin. The human seemed to enjoy talking about his people and their culture, and with each story he told, she understood more about what made humans so different from every other species she had encountered. Taemin told her about human children and how they were raised to face challenges rather than avoid them. Young humans were encouraged to climb trees and explore dangerous places, and test their limits in ways that would terrify parents of most other species. The idea was that children who learned to handle small dangers would be better prepared for the larger dangers they would face as adults. He described human sports, which seemed to be competitions designed to push the body and mind to their absolute limits. Humans would run until their bodies wanted to collapse, then keep running anyway. They would lift weights that seemed impossible to move, and they would compete in events that required them to risk serious injury just for the chance to win. When Hannah asked why humans would choose to put themselves through such suffering, Taemin explained that it was not about the suffering itself, but about discovering what they were truly capable of. A human who had pushed through pain and exhaustion to achieve something difficult knew that they could handle whatever challenges life threw at them. The Nuki had made itself completely at home and was now grooming Taemin's hair with the dedication of a creature that had found its perfect companion. The human seemed to find this amusing, and would occasionally make soft sounds that the little animal clearly understood as affection. But it was when Taemin started talking about human art and music that Hannah really began to understand the depth of his species' creativity. Humans created beautiful things not because they needed to for survival, but because the act of creation itself brought them joy. They wrote stories about heroes who faced impossible odds and won through courage and determination. Human music apparently had the power to make people feel strong emotions, even if they had never experienced the situations the songs described. They could create sounds that made you feel sad or happy or excited or peaceful, and they used this ability to help each other through difficult times. The most amazing thing was that humans shared their art freely with anyone who wanted to experience it. They did not hoard their creations or use them as weapons. Instead, they gave them as gifts to the universe, hoping that others would find joy and meaning in what they had. Taemin showed her some human music through the ship's entertainment system, and Hannah was shocked by the power of it. The sounds seemed to speak directly to her emotions in ways that her own people's music never had. There was something raw and honest about it that made her feel connected to the humans who had created it. Even though she had never met them, when she mentioned this, Taemin smiled and explained that humans believed art was a universal language that could bridge the gap between different species and cultures. They hoped that by sharing their creations, they could help other beings understand what it meant to be human. The conversation turned to philosophy, and Hannah discovered that humans had spent thousands of years thinking about questions that had no easy answers. They wondered about the meaning of life and the nature of good and evil, and whether there was any purpose to the universe beyond what they created for themselves. What fascinated her was that humans had never agreed on the answers to these questions. Instead, they celebrated the fact that different people could look at the same problem and come up with completely different solutions. This diversity of thought was seen as a strength. Rather than a weakness, Damon told her about human explorers who had traveled to the most remote places on their planet, not because they hoped to find treasure or resources, but simply because those places existed. And no human had ever seen them. The journey itself was the reward and the knowledge that they had pushed the boundaries of what was possible. This same drive had led humans to space, where they continued to explore and discover and push the limits of what their technology could accomplish. They were not content to stay in one place or stick to what was safe instead. They were always looking for the next mountain to climb or the next ocean to cross. The rescue ship was getting closer now, and Hannah could see it on the scanner, but she found herself wishing it would take longer to arrive. She was learning so much about humanity and about herself through these conversations with Tamenth. Human had made her realize that her own people had become too focused on safety and comfort. They had built a civilization that protected them from danger, but in doing so they had also protected themselves from growth and discovery. She thought about her decision to become a planetary researcher and realized that it had been driven by the same impulse that sent humans to the most dangerous places on their world. She had wanted to see what was out there beyond the safe boundaries of her homeworld, but until today she had thought of herself as unusual among her people. Now she wondered if there were others who felt the same restless desire to explore and discover. Maybe meeting humans would inspire her people to become more adventurous and willing to take risks. The Nuki chirped happily from its perch on Tamen's shoulder, and the human reached up to gently stroke its fur. The bond between them had formed so quickly and naturally that it seemed like they had always been together. This was pack bonding in action, and Hannah could see why it made humans such loyal friends and dangerous enemies. As the rescue ship prepared to dock with Tamen's vessel, Hannah realized that this encounter had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had met a representative of a species that turned obstacles into opportunities and dangers into adventures. The universe suddenly seemed full of possibilities rather than threats, and she knew that she would never be satisfied with a safe, comfortable life again. She wanted to explore and discover and push her own limits, just like the human who had saved her life. Meeting Taman had been the most important thing that had ever happened to her, and she knew that the memory of this day would inspire her for the rest of her life. 6 months after her rescue, Hannah stood before the assembled members of the Kaleri Science Council in the great hall of their homeworld capital. The room was filled with the most important scientists, philosophers, and leaders of her people, all waiting to hear about her research on the dead planet. But instead of talking about soil samples and atmospheric readings, Hannah found herself telling a different story entirely. She spoke about the storm that had destroyed her ship, about the moment when death seemed certain, and about the miraculous appearance of a human vessel that had saved her life. The council members listened with growing amazement as she described Taman and his incredible ship. They asked detailed questions about human technology and culture and philosophy, wanting to understand everything about this new species that had emerged from the unknown regions of space. Word of Hannah's story spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Within days, other beings were coming forward with their own tales of human rescues. A Zenthi trading convoy reported being saved from pirates by a human warship that had appeared just when their situation seemed hopeless. A Miran research station orbiting a dangerous star told of human engineers who had risked their lives to repair critical systems during a solar flare. The humans had worked in conditions that should have killed them and had refused any payment for their help, saying that helping others was reward enough. Each story followed the same pattern: humans appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right skills and equipment to solve problems that seemed impossible. They never asked for anything in return, and they always seemed genuinely surprised when people wanted to thank them. The Galactic Council took notice of these reports and began investigating this new species that seemed to specialize in miraculous rescues. First contact protocols were established and diplomatic messages were sent toward the region of space where Earth was supposed to be located. The response from humanity was immediate and enthusiastic. Human diplomats arrived with gifts of art and music and scientific knowledge. They were eager to learn about other species and cultures, and they brought with them stories of their own adventures among the stars. But the real ambassadors were beings like Taman, who continued to travel the galaxy in their scarred ships, listening for distress calls and ready to risk everything to help strangers in need. Every rescue added to the growing legend of human heroism and kindness. Hannah had become something of a celebrity among her people. As the first Kaleri to make contact with a human, she gave lectures about her experience and found that her audiences were always most interested in the parts of her story that showed human compassion and courage. The Nuki had become famous to the little creature, had never forgotten its human rescuer, and would become excited whenever it heard human voices on the communication systems. Hannah had taught it to recognize several human words, and it would chirp happily whenever someone mentioned Taemin. Taemin himself had kept his promise to stay in touch. Regular messages arrived from him as he continued his travels through the galaxy. Each message contained new stories of humans doing impossible things, not because they had to, but because someone needed help, and they were in a position to provide it. The messages painted a picture of a species that was spreading throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors or traitors, but as helpers and protectors. Humans seemed to show up wherever they were needed most, bringing aid and comfort to beings who had given up hope. Other species began to change their exploration and research protocols based on what they had learned about humans. Ships started carrying better emergency equipment and communication systems, designed to send distress signals that humans could detect. The very idea that help might actually come when you called for it had transformed how many beings thought about taking risks. Some species that had never ventured far from their homeworlds began launching their own exploration missions, knowing that if something went wrong, there might be humans nearby to save them. Hannah herself had been changed by her encounter in ways that went far beyond her newfound fame. She had requested assignment to the most dangerous research missions available, pushing the boundaries of what Kaleri scientists had ever attempted. Her success inspired others to take similar risks. The discovery of humanity had created a wave of optimism that spread throughout the known galaxy. The universe was a dangerous place, filled with hostile environments and deadly phenomena, but it was also filled with humans who would risk their own lives to help strangers in her laboratory, surrounded by data from dozens of successful missions to worlds that had once been considered too dangerous to explore. Hannah would look at her pet Nuki and remember the moment when salvation had fallen from the sky like a gift from the stars. The galaxy had learned that it contained something precious beyond all the rare minerals and ancient artifacts and scientific discoveries. It contained hope in the form of a species that believed helping others was more important than personal safety. Late at night, when the city was quiet, Hannah would sometimes receive priority messages on her personal communicator. These were reports of new human rescues happening somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars. Each report followed the familiar pattern: impossible situation, miraculous arrival, heroic rescue, no payment requested. The humans had given the galaxy something it had never had before: the absolute certainty that when things looked darkest, when death seemed inevitable, when all hope was lost, somewhere out there was a human who would land like a hero and make everything right again. And in the years that followed, as more and more species encountered humans and experienced their boundless compassion and courage, the legend grew until every child in the galaxy knew that the universe was not an empty, hostile place, but a home watched over by beings who would never let you face danger alone. The stars themselves seemed brighter now that everyone knew humans were out there among them, ready to answer any call for help and willing to risk everything to save a stranger they had never met.